Your graduate research team in Guatemala, just checking in. Robert Jordan, a second semester junior, requesting a second extension on his term paper. And your mother reminding you about your father.
Surprise birthday party next Sunday.
Today you have a faculty lunch at 12 o'clock. You need to take Kathy to the airport by 2. You have a lecture at 4:15 on deforestation in the Amazon rainforest.
Right. Let me see the lecture notes from last semester. No, that's not enough. I need to review more recent literature. Pull up all the new articles I haven't read yet.
Journal articles only?
Fine.
Your friend Jill Gilbert has published an article about deforestation in the Amazon and its effects on rainfall in the sub-Sahara. It also covers drought's effect on food production in Africa and increasing imports of food.
Contact Jill.
I'm sorry, she's not available right now. I left a message that you had called.
Okay. Let's see. There's an article about 5 years ago, Dr. Flemson or something. He really disagreed with the direction of Jill's research.
John Fleming of Uppsala University. He published in the Journal of Earth Science of July 20 of 2006.
Yes, that's it. He was challenging Jill's projection of the amount of carbon dioxide being released to the atmosphere through deforestation. I'd like to recheck his figures.
Here's the rate of deforestation he predicted.
And what happened? He was really off. Give me the University Research Network. Show only universities with geography nodes. Show Brazil. Copy the last 30 years at this location at 1-month intervals.
Excuse me, Jill Gilbert is calling back.
Great. Put her through.
Hi, Mike. What's up?
Jill, thanks for getting back to me. Well, I guess that new grant of yours hasn't dampened your literary abilities. Rumor has it that you've just put out the definitive article on deforestation.
Aha. Is this one of your typical last-minute panics for lecture material?
No. That's not until,
4:15.
Well, it's about the effects that reducing the size of the Amazon rainforest can have outside of Brazil. I was wondering, it's not really necessary, but,
Yes?
It would be great if you were available to make a few comments. Nothing formal. After my talk, you would come up on the big screen, discuss your article, and then answer some questions from the class.
And bail you out again? Well, I think I could squeeze that in. You know, I have a simulation that shows the spread of the Sahara over the last 20 years. Here, let me show you.
Nice. Very nice. I've got some maps of the Amazon area during the same time. Let's put these together.
Great. I'd like to have a copy of that for myself.
What happens if we bring down the logging rate to 100,000 acres per year? Interesting. I can definitely use this. Thanks for your time, Jill. I really appreciate it.
No problem. But next time I'm in Berkeley, you're buying the dinner.
Dinner, right.
See ya, 4:15.
Bye-bye.
While you were busy, your mother called again to remind you to pick up the birthday cake.
Fine. Print this article before I go.
Now printing.
Okay, I'm going to lunch now. If Kathy calls, tell her I'll be there at 2 o'clock. Also, find out if I can set up a meeting tomorrow morning with, Tom Lee.
Enjoy your lunch. Hello, Professor Bradford is away at the moment. Would you like to leave a message?
Michael, this is your mother. I know that you're there. I'm just calling to remind you to call your sister and pick up.
Hi, I'm Bert Cummings of Apple Higher Education Marketing. The tape you just saw, which we call the Knowledge Navigator, was developed by us in 1987 to present one vision of what the future of personal computing might be like. The personal computer used in the Knowledge Navigator embodied a number of highly advanced technologies. Some of those are available today, but at a very high price. Some perhaps won't be available to us in this decade at any price. Welcome to the Apple Education TV series. We're very excited about this new way of sharing information via live satellite broadcast. We'll be broadcasting to you periodically on a range of topics relating to the integration of technology into higher education. And now that we're together in this first broadcast, we'd like to show you the progress we're making in the technologies that will take us to the Knowledge Navigator and beyond. Now, remember when you were a kid and almost anything seemed possible? When the ordeals of Dick Tracy or Luke Skywalker were seen just as challenges that you knew they would overcome. Well, that feeling is alive in many people here at Apple today. A belief that before you can create great things, you must have a dream and an ability to imagine. That's why we've called our series of broadcasts Imagine. Today, we hope to give you a look into what some very bright people at Apple are imagining these days. The people you'll hear from today are part of a special group at Apple called the Advanced Technology Group. Their mission is to develop promising technologies that you might find one day soon on your desktop. Later in the broadcast, you'll have a chance to call in and talk to these presenters during our question and answer period. That number now appears on your screen. Let's start by meeting Dick Lyon. He's working on new ways to control our future computers. Through speech recognition, Dick believes we can increase access to personal computing beyond the keyboard and mouse. Dick, thanks a lot for joining us here today.
My pleasure, Bert.
Can you tell us about the interaction that we just saw on that tape between the professor and the computer that he was using?
Sure, I'd love to. You remember the part where the professor was asking his computer for some information from a database?
Uh-huh.
Let's take a look at that again.
Okay.
Give me the University Research Network. Show only universities with geography nodes. Show Brazil.
So you see, this is an example of one way that a person might realistically interact with a computer. I think it's probably the most realistic segment on the tape, and it shows the professor asking his computer questions by voice, but then gets up menus of things which he selects by pointing. So the voice has not been used as a replacement for the other channels of pointing and keyboards, but as an adjunct, an extra channel that he can use if he likes. So rather than saying the word from the menu, he can point at it. He has a range of options. Now, speech will be chosen as a more natural and productive option by many people. A lot of people have trouble with keyboards. Handicapped people, for example, have a lot of trouble with keyboards, but other people are quite comfortable with keyboards and maybe can type faster than they can talk. So there'll be a range of options. We don't see voice as the answer to how to interact with a personal computer.
So we're not looking at it as a replacement for these devices?
Right, it's an alternate.
Okay.
Now, let me tell you about some of the hard problems in speech recognition. I've written on the board over here what we see as the classic hard problems. First, speaker independence. For example, if I say the word hello and you say the word hello,
Hello?
it sounds like the same word to us. We don't have any trouble with that. And yet there's a different sound. The voices are different. My voice is not the same as your voice. The computer has a hard time making that distinction between what aspect of the sound is important to getting the word right and what aspect is just variations between different speakers. Second, the large vocabulary issue. If you've got a computer that's trained up on general office correspondence and you start talking to it about deforestation in the Amazon and geography in Brazil and so on, it's not going to understand those words. If you want it to be a really general purpose application of speech recognition, it's going to need as large a vocabulary as you have. Third, the problem of continuous speech. I may be talking pretty fast for you, but it's better than speaking one word at a time, which is the way many computer speech recognition devices of today require you to speak. And finally, a hard problem of which I'm particularly interested in is dealing with noisy acoustic environments, such as a typical noisy office. You can probably still hear me through all this background noise, but The computer has an awful lot of trouble with this kind of background noise, phone ringing, other voices, and so forth.
Now, are these problems that you're working on right now?
Yes, in fact, Apple's working on all of these problems, but since we have a small group here and there's a lot of hard problems, we really have active collaborations with a number of major universities in all these areas. MIT, Carnegie Mellon, and Caltech are all actively working on us on solving different aspects of these problems.
I see.
Let's take a look at the state of the art in speech recognition technology today. One example in terms of what's on the market in terms of a low-cost product that you can buy and hook up to your Macintosh is a system I've brought here from Articulate Systems called a voice Navigator. If we're lucky, we can make a live demo work here. Let's give it a try.
Let's hope.
File, open, edit, edit, select all, file, get info, get info. It usually works. Next window, close window, view, by name, zoom. Well, I made a few mistakes. Maybe I'm nervous here.
Now, I understand that this is a product that's available commercially now as an adaptive device. Is that correct?
That's right. The product is pretty popular. It's low cost, and people with handicaps find it particularly useful. Another example of the state of the art in speech recognition today is the work in the research lab by the group doing spoken language research with Victor Zhu at MIT. They've put together a system that helps users navigate their way around the city of Cambridge. Let me show you how that works now.
Okay.
Show me all the restaurants.
I know of 11 restaurants.
Which one serves Chinese food?
I know of 2 Chinese restaurants.
Which one is closest to me?
Where are you?
I'm at Harvard University.
The nearest Chinese restaurant to Harvard University that I know of is Hong Kong.
How far is it?
Hong Kong is about 1/4 mile from Harvard University.
How do I walk there?
I'll try to find the best way to walk there. Massachusetts Avenue is one way, so follow the traffic. Bear left at the fork. Hong Kong is about 1/4 mile down on your right side. That's the end of the directions.
So, Dick, in that clip, why did it take so long for the computer to process the questions that were posed to it?
Well, that system starts with a model of the human auditory system, which itself involves more computation than we can do on a typical personal computer of today. And then it has models of the large number of words, the syntax of the language, the meaning of the words, even a model of locations and streets around Cambridge so it can answer the user's questions. The system is really addressing some of the hard problems, speaker independence, continuous speech, has a moderate-sized vocabulary. So it really running right now in the lab on 3 computers running at once. It takes about a minute to process a second of speech, but that can all be brought down through better technology and more engineering of that system. Let's take a look at what we might be able to do in the near future. We've put together, Apple has a tape called Project 2000 from which we've selected a segment which we believe illustrates a task that we'll be able to do in the near future on adult literacy. Let me show you that now.
Okay.
After filling the engine with oil, the coil wire should be grounded and the engine cranked by the starter motor until the oil What's this word?
Pressure.
Oh, pressure. Until the oil pressure gauge reads 10 pounds.
So we can see this system responds to continuously spoken speech. It can be speaker independent, but it doesn't need to have a large vocabulary, so it's backed off on some of the hard problems. The computer pretty much knows what word to expect when the person is reading from the text. It needs to be able to recognize phrases like, what's this word? So this is an interesting example of the way that we can go beyond the simple devices into things that really don't have to attack all of the hard problems at once. In order for that kind of machine to be really robust in a noisy environment, however, which might be important, I'm particularly interested in the problem of how the human auditory system works because we're very good at dealing with noises. I brought with me today a model of the human inner ear. Now, this part over here has to do with balance. We're not so interested in that, but this spiral-shaped structure called the cochlea is the part that processes sound waves. Waves are coupled in from the middle ear and propagate in the fluid system. In fact, let me show you what it looks like inside. The waves in the fluid propagate through this spiral chamber, bending a membrane which then fires off nerve pulses through the auditory nerve up to the brain. And we model this kind of thing with mathematical models of how the wave propagation works to see really what happens to sounds when they go in here. Mm-hmm. One way we look at those models is with a program called Mathematica on the Macintosh. And I've got an example here of showing some pressure waves in the cochlea of two different pure tones. And you can see, let me just animate this for you so you can see how the higher frequency tones are localized at a different place further to the left than the lower frequency tones. The horizontal dimension represents the place in the cochlea when we've unrolled the spiral structure.
So then this is really a mathematical representation of what speech would look like from the cochlea's perspective?
That's right. This isn't speech. We've used two pure tones here to simplify the signal down to something where we can really see better what's going on. Speech would be a more complex picture, but by looking at these simple signals we can get a good handle on understanding how the system works.
Okay.
Now, going beyond the cochlea, there's a lot of interesting processing that goes on. We're really interested in knowing what goes on in the brain. We've been particularly interested in a representation we call a corellogram. This is an example, a picture of a corellogram that you might see of a spoken vowel. And it shows with horizontal patterns the locations of the resonances of the vocal tract called formants. And with these vertical patterns that move back and forth as your pitch period changes, you get an idea what the rate of glottal pulses is. These are a couple of the different kinds of important features that people look for in speech recognition.
So processing these corellograms are going to help solve some of these problems?
That's right. In particular, the corellogram is a good representation for seeing multiple sound sources. For example, if we took the soundtrack from that reading machine, adult literacy example, run it through a computer model, and produce a moving corellogram, you'll actually be able to see not only the voice, but also the background music as a different kind of pattern. Let me show you that now.
Okay.
After filling the engine with oil, the coil wire should be grounded and the engine cranked by the starter motor until the oil What's this word?
Pressure.
Oh, pressure. Until the oil pressure gauge reads 10 pounds.
So, this kind of computation we've done on a Cray computer.
Oh, so can you get this type of processing on the desktop?
Oh, well, isn't the Cray a personal computer?
I think we're getting close, aren't we?
Yeah, okay, well, definitely. In fact, some of the innovations we need in the future have to do with, as I said, reducing the cost of all this, and one way we're going to do that is through custom VLSI chips. In fact, let me talk about those innovations that are needed. One, as I say, custom VLSI chips. I just brought one with me today. This is one I designed recently that models the cochlea. Can you see that in there?
Mm-hmm.
It's a little bit small, so I brought a photograph. Maybe you could see this a little better. This is a photomicrograph of a chip that we designed that models propagation of sound waves in the cochlea. We can do a lot more nonlinear, complex analog processing on a chip like this than we can do on a Cray supercomputer even.
So this is a chip that you've designed?
Right. Now this one we designed with some collaborators at Caltech, and this later one I designed myself here at Apple. Now, this kind of brain-like VLSI computing is an area that a lot of people are working on nowadays. It'll take us orders of magnitude beyond what we can do with conventional digital computers. And other innovations that we still need to really work this problem is to really understand how all levels of hearing work, to understand how various sources of variability in speech come in, and really all the way up through the natural language understanding. Now, how far have we come in all this? Well, sometimes it seems like it's a constant 5 years to completion on the speech recognition problem, but really there has been a lot of progress. We do have low-cost, reliable devices on the market now, such as I've shown you. And there are a lot more applications where there are limited inroads into working the various hard problems. But for the kind of conversational interaction we saw in the Knowledge Navigator tape, I don't think we're going to see it in this decade, this century, maybe in 2001.
2001? So you're giving me a constant 11 years to completion versus the normal 5 that you guys normally give me.
Right, I'm committed for that.
Okay, I can hold you to it.
Right.
All right, thanks very much, Dick.
You bet.
Our next speaker is responsible for advancing the art of the user interface on the Macintosh. Dave Nagel is going to demonstrate how visualization allows us to see and know things never before possible with our personal computers. Dave, thank you very much for coming today.
Thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit about what data visualization will mean to the rest of us?
Well, Bert, I can tell you what it means to me. As you and Dick were talking, I was reminded of my own career 20 years ago as a graduate student, and I was trying to understand many of the same things that Dick has been working on the last couple of years, the analysis of sounds by the inner ear. I didn't have the same tools that Dick does, in particular tools like Mathematica, so I spent really months trying to develop a very simple model of the analysis of sounds by the inner ear and a lot of 16mm movie film to make about a 10-second film that showed the membrane move in response to, again, like Dick, simple sounds. Really, by today's standards, it was incredibly crude, but I still remember the excitement I felt myself when I first saw the membrane move in response to sounds. And we didn't call it visualization at the time, but I think it was really the first time I realized myself personally how important that visualization can be in science. It's really, Dick's work is an indication, I think, of how far both the science of understanding the ear and the technology of visualization have come. What I'd like to talk about today is the technology of visualization and why it's important increasingly in science. I think simply defined, visualization is just the creation of images from numerical data. And there really are two things that are driving the technology and making it even more popular than I think in the future than it is today. First is that science has really new forms, new ways of measuring nature, new instrumentation that lets us measure things at a much greater range of scales than we've ever had before. And it's also creating just a huge amount of data, a sea of data to try to understand. The other thing is that computer power has just increased amazingly in the last 30 years, 6 or 7 orders of magnitude. It shows no signs of stopping. Again, it's creating new opportunities for science to do computations and do science numerically, but it's also creating this central problem of understanding. So I think visualization is a tool that we'll use primarily to enhance our ability to understand what's in our data. I'd like to go back for just a moment to the scientists of the future in the Knowledge Navigator to get a little better picture of what we mean by visualization.
You know, I have a simulation that shows the spread of the Sahara over the last 20 years. Here, let me show you.
Nice. Very nice.
Now, this is really a simple example, even by today's standards, but I think it's easy to imagine how differently it would be if instead of these images, these pictures of the Sahara, that our scientists had just tables of numbers to look at.
So then is it fair to say that data visualization allows us to derive more meaning, better meaning from the data that technology makes available to us now?
I think that's really the central idea, is understanding. As you could see in the original tape that we showed, it also helps in communication. So you can really show someone something much more easily than you can describe it even with numbers. I think the final point is that it helps. It doesn't replace all other forms of analysis, but it does help the scientists to look for areas where interesting things are happening. What I'd like to do now is to look at what's possible today, both using the fastest and most powerful computers, supercomputers, as well as the Macintosh, an advanced personal computer. The first simulation I'd like to show was created by Dr. Rob Wolf and Dr. Mike Norman at the University of Illinois. Rob Wolf is now a research scientist at Apple. Rob and Mike were really interested in the interaction. They're both physicists and were interested in the interaction of the solar wind with the planet Venus. The simulation that I'm going to show you shows the solar wind going from left to right, which is a hot ionized oxygen plasma, the solar wind ripping the ionosphere off of the surface of the Venus planet. Now, the shaded relief in this visualization shows the plasma pressure, and the color indicates the magnetic field strength, with the blue being zero field strength. The solar wind, again, is going from the left to the right at about 100 kilometers a second. You can see the results of the transfer of energy from the plasma of the solar wind to the ionosphere of Venus, and the formation in some cases of these sort of magnetically entrapped bubbles of ionosphere which are being carried away. The visualization is really powerful. It really gives you a very strong and very direct sense of what's happening. But it took 20 hours to do on a Cray XMP computer, a very powerful supercomputer. And worse than that, it was really preceded by about 2 years of titration and working on the model and getting the boundary conditions and so forth.
So what did researchers do before they had this ability to visualize the data?
Well, I think they had all the physics was thought to be pretty well understood. What they didn't have was a strong sense of the dynamics, and in particular this entrapment of the plasma by these magnetic bubbles and the carrying away. They thought it was really a much more uniform process. So the visualization in this case has really created a much better understanding of the dynamics of the whole system. And its most interesting thing is it's an understanding which has since been validated by actual data. Now, what I'd like to turn to now is an even more dramatic example of visualization itself. Dr. Robert Wilhelmsen, again at the University of Illinois at the National Center for Supercomputer Applications, has been studying the evolution and formation of a very complicated meteorological phenomenon, in this case, a tornado. I think this clip pretty well speaks for itself, so I'm going to let you just take a look at it.
Okay.
Watch for possible debris. We're entering a high danger zone. You might, if the wind gets too much to battle, you might slow it down. Estimated wind speed 50 to 60 knots. Rain or hail curtains wrapping extremely rapidly right at 11:30, right ahead of us, and very dark ahead. And maybe we'll have better visibility in just a second. We're driving into a strong mesocyclone. Okay, now be real careful, Neil. Slow it down. This would be where we drive right into the tornado, so be very, very careful.
CG.
Rapid circulation, right overhead. Slow down, Neil. Stop. Rapid circulation. About 1/2. Debris! Debris! Tornado! Passing right in front of us.
I got it on video.
The understanding of severe storms begins with observations of their behavior. Weightless particles released near the ground at regular intervals are colored orange when rising and blue when sinking. Yellow streamers clarify paths taken by individual particles. Initially, all air in and around the storm rises upward. Then, as large precipitation particles form, some of this air begins to fall to the north of the main updraft. This separation of updraft and downdraft is crucial for the continued development of a severe storm. Rotation of air in and around the storm is an important factor in its behavior. A ribbon's rate of twist indicates the amount of local rotation. This is termed streamwise vorticity. The twisting of these ribbons is predominantly clockwise when facing the direction of the ribbon's movement. Substantial rotational growth is evident as the ribbons begin to rise in the updraft or enter the downdraft. Such flow is an important factor in prolonging an individual thunderstorm's life.
It was really dramatic. I think this may be the most advanced visualization that's really ever been done. But it, again, took 5 hours, in this case on a Cray 2 supercomputer, and the rendering process itself probably consumed maybe a man-year. It used a special software package called Wavefront. It's relatively difficult to use, and really only experts can use it. But I think with the increase in computing power that we'll have even at the PC level in the next 10 years or so, that by the end of this decade we'll be doing things like this routinely on a personal computer. Our final visualization that I'd like to show you is of the planet Mars. There really are two kinds of images that are created to make this clip. One is, both of them were gathered by Viking. One of them is a photo image of the surface of the planet, and the other is a radar height map. Using a technique called texture mapping, the scientists were able to create a picture of Mars, the surface of Mars, that really no human has ever seen. I'm proud to say that that simulation is doable today on a Macintosh.
Really?
A major problem, however, we can do all these great things, but a major problem is that not all scientists can get access to the supercomputers. In some cases, not all of them can travel to where the supercomputer is. So a goal of ours is to let the scientists be really, literally located anywhere and get access and interactively interact with these sorts of simulations. Now, what do we need to do this? First of all, we're going to have a much better access to the supercomputers. Let's take a look at a typical campus computing network. When we look at a typical network, we find in best cases a supercomputer tied to some sort of a personal workstation, perhaps a graphics workstation, all together on some sort of a local area net. And typically the speeds of access and speeds of transfer are limited to about 1,000,000 bits per second. The internet, the thing that connects the network that connects campuses between campuses, typically limits speeds to on the order of 50,000 bits a second. We're going to need several orders of magnitude improvement in that in order to make direct interaction with a supercomputer possible. So one of the things we definitely need are improved network speeds. We're also going to need new kinds of software and for managing the simulations, as well as the faster networks to create access to the networks and the supercomputers themselves.
Now, I know we're involved with a number of initiatives to tie together a number of the campuses around the country, some national network initiatives. Can you explain a little bit about the work going on in that area?
Well, two bills have actually been introduced in Congress, one of them in the Senate and one of them in the House. A Senate bill introduced by Senator Gore initially, and the Office of Science and Technology Policy has also come out and said that national networks such as this would be a very high scientific priority for the nation, number 4, I believe. Both of these bills would put into place a very fast national backbone network capable of on the order of 1 gigabit per second or more speeds, which is shown on this little simulation. It's 3 orders of magnitude greater than what we have today. To give you an idea of how different this is than today's transfer speeds, we have a little illustration that shows how much data can be transmitted across one of these sorts of this sort of network at different speeds. On the left of the picture, you see a single page that could transmit in a fraction of a second, maybe 100 milliseconds, tenth of a second. That represents a 50,000 bit per second network. In the middle, 1 megabit allows you to transmit about 20 pages, but if you have a 3 gigabit network, you can transmit literally a small library, multiple volumes of information in well less than a second. So it allows you to both keep up with the supercomputer simulations and also transmit images back and forth. In the future, we think both the visualizations of the variety we've seen today and the basic computations will be done by undergraduates as well as graduate students using PCs. Not all of us will have to have access to the supercomputers. Scientists who are always working on the forefront and always want the most advanced equipment will be doing even greater simulations of even greater complexity and richness using supercomputers tied together with this National Research and Education Network.
Okay, now you keep saying in the future. Say I'm a graduate student and I want to have this visualization on my desktop. When can I expect to see that?
Well, research has already begun, and I'm going to be optimistic and assume that the Congress passes these important bills. If they do, and we get cracking on it, I think that in 7 to 8 years we can have the visualizations that I've shown you will be done doable almost anywhere and doable interactively by scientists without immediate physical access to the supercomputers.
Okay, great. So we've got 7 to 8 years from you. I got 11 years from Dick, and this will really put the pressure on Mark to see what we can come up with.
Right.
Thanks very much, Dave.
Thank you.
One of the more interesting technologies making its way into curriculum and research today is the use of video. With us now is Mark Cutter of the Advanced Technology Group to tell us more about future directions for video. Hi, Mark.
Morning, Bert.
Could you tell us a little bit about what we can see in terms of video on the desktop? I noticed in the clip that there was made extensive use of video on the personal computer that professor was using.
Yeah, the Knowledge Navigator used video, and the particular thing that it enabled in that kind of a concept was the collaboration. Let's take a look at the sequence there and see what I mean.
Okay.
Excuse me, Jill Gilbert is calling back.
Great. Put her through.
Hi, Mike. What's up?
Jill, thanks for getting back to me. Well, I guess that new grant of yours hasn't dampened your literary abilities. Rumor has it that you've just put out the definitive article on deforestation.
Aha. Is this one of your typical last-minute panics for lecture material?
So you see there, Bert, that the professor was collaborating with his colleague And presumably his colleague could see him in a video window on her screen at the other end. And what particularly enriched this collaboration was the fact that each of them could also see what was going on the rest of the computer screen at the same time. Now, if every personal computer had this kind of connectivity built in, it would enable a whole new class of collaborative applications. Now, in order to see how this might change the way that people work on a day-to-day basis, the Advanced Technology Group started a project a couple of years ago called SPIDER, which provided video connectivity on demand to over 60 offices throughout Apple's R&D facilities here. So let's take a look at the SPIDER system in action. So here you see on the screen, SPIDER provides the ability for people to connect to each other and see each other on the screen in a video window on the left-hand side of the screen, a number up to, say, 16 people. At the same time, it provides the ability to see what's going on in a common document. In this demonstration, the group is collaboratively producing a document, and as one user scrolls around and makes changes in the document, everyone else can see what he's doing and what's going on at the same time.
That's really interesting. Now, what we just saw, how is that different from what people know today with video teleconferencing, say?
Well, there are a number of technical differences, but I think from a user standpoint, the user never had to leave his office to go to a video teleconferencing facility in order to take part in the collaboration. Sitting in your office, it's as convenient as the telephone. We think this may, in fact, change the way that people work. Now, there are many other uses of video in a personal computing environment as well. In fact, a common use that's been around for a number of years has been pre-recorded video on video disks in industrial training environments, or more recently in interactive educational courseware kinds of environments. And you know, it's interesting that Apple's introduction of HyperCard in the last few years has greatly simplified the task of creating this kind of interactive video application, which some people are calling hypermedia today. Now, a group in ATG called the Multimedia Lab up in San Francisco produced a hypermedia application for the American Federation of Teachers Conference last fall, which is a very good example of hypermedia. Let's take a look at it and you'll see what I mean.
So if I click on this, what I get is a series of interviews related to the particular topic. I believe this is roles and relationships. So if I click on this picture here, it says involve parents.
And so the parents, teachers, administrators together planned the program of the school. And because they had a stake in the outcome, because they planned it, then they began to turn out in very large numbers and support the program of the school.
So this is an interview with somebody, and I don't know who it is yet, so I can click on the Profiles button and find out that more about the person. This one is James Comer. He is a child psychologist at Yale. And I have some articles in here and some different interviews. So I can just jump right back. And we can see different interviews by clicking on the different people.
This question today, when I was giving a presentation, I looked at the teachers and I said, if I told you...
Day of confrontation and adversarial relations and tactics, and I've done my share of them, are over. Have to be.
So you see, Bert, that the potential for video in a personal computing environment is really quite compelling. However, there's some practical problems that need to be resolved before it becomes commonplace. For example, in order to implement SPIDER, we needed over $500,000 worth of analog video switching equipment to provide that level of connectivity. And for hypermedia applications, you need a video disc player, which is hardly a common computer peripheral. So what's so difficult about video? Well, it has to be integrated into the rest of the computer system. And the fundamental problem is that computers manipulate digital data, and video traditionally is an analog medium. So the solution, the common solution today is to either provide a completely separate monitor for the video signal exclusively, separate from the computer display, or alternatively, in the last few years there have been these video overlay cards that you can actually put the video in a window on your computer screen with the rest of the display. Now, this won't be the case for long, however, because in general there's a technology trend away from analog and into digital.
Analog video going to digital video?
Yeah, well, and in other domains as well. For example, one of the best examples is in audio. The whole advent of CD audio discs in the last year has completely revolutionized the industry. And digital television is really not far behind. In fact, you can go out today and actually buy televisions that have digital capabilities, the so-called picture-in-a-picture for viewing multiple channels at the same time. And at the high end of video, you can actually today go out and buy fully digital videotape recorders. And they provide the capability of doing multiple generations of edits or dubs without any loss in picture quality. So it's really only a question of time before all video becomes digital. And the main problem that needs to be overcome is the tremendous data rates that's required for video. In fact, today's computer technology is off by about 2 orders of magnitude in the data rates that are actually required. Let me give you an example to show you what I mean. This is a CD-ROM disk. Okay, now it's the same kind of disk that's used in the CD audio applications, but it's also used for computers because it is a digital disk. And it's considered to be one of the larger capacity storage devices that's available for computers today. Now this disk holds a tremendous amount of data, 550 to 600 megabytes. Well, how much is that, do you say? You know? Well, this one disk holds enough data to store, say, the entire 30 volumes of the Encyclopedia Britannica in text form. Now, the problem with video is that video is not text format. Video is image format. And here's where the old saying that a picture's worth 1,000 words becomes a liability rather than an asset. In fact, a television quality picture takes about half a megabyte of storage. So the same disk that could hold the entire Encyclopedia Britannica in text form can only hold about 1,100 video images. And if you play those images back at the 30 frame per second rate of video, you end up with about 36 seconds worth of actual video. So you see that computer storage technology today falls short. And similarly, communication technology also falls short. Take the CD-ROM as an example again. It has a data rate of about 150 kilobytes per second. And digital video requires a data rate of about 15 megabytes per second. So we're off by about a factor of 100 to 1. Now, to give you an example, it would take me over an hour to get enough data off of this disk to play back 30 seconds worth of video. And similarly, computer networks of today have data rate problems as well. One of the most popular networks, university campuses, is Ethernet. And Ethernet has an effective data rate of about 300 kilobytes per second, which puts it roughly in the same ballpark as the 150 kilobyte per second data rate of the CD-ROM. So it falls short. So if we want to get video into the personal computer environment, we're left with a couple of options. We could wait around for 5 or 10 years until computer capacities get up to the point that they can support the data rates required for video. Or alternatively, we could try to reduce the requirements that video places on the computer system. And in fact, this is the approach that a number of people are pursuing today. They're trying to compress video down by a factor of 100 to 1 so that it will fit within the capacity of today's computer systems. So one way of looking at that is if we were able to achieve 100 to 1 to compression, the same disk that was able to get 35 seconds worth of video before in an uncompressed form would now get over a full hour of video on that same disk.
Okay.
Now, when you talk about 100 to 1 compression, it sounds like a pretty tall order. And in fact, in the last few years, people have gotten very excited about 24 bits of color per pixel and the imagery that that provides in computer displays. Well, now we're talking about taking that away from them. We're talking about reducing that by 100 to 1 so that they'll be left with basically a quarter of a bit per pixel. Well, it sounds like that must look pretty bad. But in fact, these are the data rates that people have been achieving. So let me show you some examples of that.
Okay.
So here what you see on the screen coming up is a prototypical talking head. On the left-hand side of the screen is the original image shot off the camera. And on the right-hand side is the same image compressed by a factor of 100 to 1. And this is actually in real time. And this image was actually computed on our Cray computer, achieving this level of data rate. Now, the kind of imagery that we want to use for hypermedia applications is not just talking heads. It's much more cinematic. And to get an idea of how this technology works, we ran the same algorithm on a more traditional kind of a cinematic scene. So let's see how that looks as well. So here again, on the left-hand side of the screen, you see the original image. And on the right-hand side of the screen, you see the same image compressed by a factor of 100 to 1. And the reason that this is different than the prototypical talking head, which is used for video teleconferencing, is that here the whole scene moves with pans and zooms. Instead of just having the head being the only thing that's moving in the scene and the background remaining constant, you have the whole scene moving to worry about. And that's a fundamentally more difficult problem. So you can imagine that the technology needed to do 100 to 1 compression is fairly complex. And it is. It's based on something called the discrete cosine transform, or DCT, which is a fairly mathematically intensive kind of an algorithm. And this algorithm has actually been proposed as a worldwide standard by some of the international standards committees.
So standards are being proposed right now.
Yeah.
If this is the case, a lot of the questions that I get on campuses today are people aren't sure that they want to actually do work with video discs. They might want to think about waiting till the technology allows them to put some of this video on the CD-ROMs.
Well, I wouldn't advise them to wait at this point. You can actually buy commercial implementations of this today. It's used for the video teleconferencing industry, but it's fairly expensive with the mathematical intensity of the algorithm. Units start around $50,000 or so. So for the short term, I think that the video disk-based applications is the best bet.
Okay.
So to summarize, video has a tremendous kind of a promise for the personal computer kind of environment, but one of the problems that it has is that it needs to be integrated into the system, and the data rates that are present represent a fundamental problem. Rather than waiting around for computer technology to get to the point that it can support those data rates, we want to try to compress the video signal down so that it's compact enough to fit on the current generation of computer technology. You know, in a way, it's kind of like what people do when they freeze dry coffee. You start with a cup of coffee, and then a factory takes the water out of the coffee so that it can be shipped around in a much more compact form. Then at the other end, all you have to do is add water to reconstitute it and hope that it closely approximates the original.
Okay. I've got 7 to 8 years from Dave. When I get video technology integrated onto my desk in a way that seems very natural to me, how much time am I looking at?
Well, of course, the good news is that we're able to demonstrate this in the lab, and in fact, you can buy commercial systems. The bad news is that today they're very expensive. But the good news is that with the advent of this technology in consumer television, it's going to drive the cost of these chips down tremendously. So I would anticipate probably in about 3 to 5 years, you'll see this in a form that it's commercially feasible for the personal computing environment.
Okay, great. Thanks very much for that, Mark. It's now time for your questions. So while Mark and I move over to the table, please call the numbers you see on your screen. We're also going to address topics of speech recognition and visualization. If you're having trouble getting through, please keep dialing. But if you would, please go to the phones right now and call the 800 number that we're showing you. While we're waiting for some of these calls to come in, Dick, you're obviously at the high end of the time factor here. You're talking about your rolling 11 years, and I imagine you'll give me the same answer a year from now. If we're seeing commercial products available now, like the Voice Navigator that you demonstrated, why is it going to be taking so long, this 11 years that you talked about, until we really see speech truly integrated into our systems?
That's an excellent question, Bert. Basically, I have a historical perspective on it. You might have asked the same question 20 years ago, because in 1970 we had devices on the market that were speaker-trained isolated word recognizers. So what's happened in those 20 years? Well, things have gotten a lot better and a lot cheaper. A lot more applications have been addressed. But we haven't had the fundamental breakthroughs we need to get to the Knowledge Navigator kind of performance. I think in 11 more years, maybe we'll get there.
Okay, Dave, we've got a question that's coming in from Larry at Illinois. Go ahead, please, Larry.
Oh, hi, this is Larry Smar.
Hi, Larry.
How's it going?
Good.
So, they've seen the thunderstorm video?
They've seen the thunderstorm video, Larry, and I've just sort of issued a prognosis that it's going to take us 7 to 8 years to get to the point where we can do these sorts of interactive simulations with your supercomputers. Am I being pessimistic or optimistic?
Well, I think that to do something of that scale on your desktop, it probably will be something like that. We're hoping that the fiber optic superhighways that will be hopefully coming in over that same time period will allow people to use their personal computers, which of course will be much more powerful by then, to do a lot of that more or less routinely and for essentially anything you can imagine as a phenomenon in nature, from looking at atoms interacting with each other in a test tube up through global change sorts of things.
I forgot to introduce this as, thought it was a familiar voice. This is Larry Smarr, who's the director of the National Center for Supercomputer Applications at the University of Illinois, where we got lots of our visual material this morning.
Larry, one of the other things that Dave mentioned was that the visualization that we saw of the tornado was one of the most advanced that are available. What other type of visualizations are you working on out there?
We do about 24 of these team efforts a year. About half of them are for American industry that involve direct engineering or manufacturing applications, and about half of them for the university community. For instance, we recently did one on taking all of the data from the burning of Yellowstone over the last 100 years and putting that together in a visual way that you would say with the Macintosh you could go through and make a movie using our software that we've developed and given to people to really see the progress of reforestation and so forth. We've done things involving chemistry, ecology, astrophysics, engineering, virtually any subject. The thing that makes it very unusual is that we have artists, computer scientists, people from the graphics commercial world that make TV commercials, feature films. We pulled together the sort of technology you use on Monday Night Football for instant replays. And it's that pulling together across the board of a Renaissance team that is, actually we sort of learned it from Apple. You know, in the early days when you guys were inventing the user interface, I was always sort of impressed about how you had artists and graphic designers and so forth along with technologists. And it seems to be a really winning combination.
Great. Thanks very much, Larry. Hope to get out there to see you sometime soon.
Nice to hear from you.
We're looking forward to it.
Appreciate you calling.
Yep. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. We now have a question. Oh, we've lost that call. All right. Now this is what they told me about, that this would happen. We now got a call coming in from Rusty. Rusty, go ahead with your question, please.
I'm curious about what kinds of storage devices people would use in an interactive format like a Knowledge Navigator. Would it still be necessary to pre-produce things like CD-ROMs and video disks, or would there be some other technology that would be used?
Well, I think the read-only memory is going to be with us for quite a while, but you know, there's a lot of new technologies that are coming along, like the magneto-optical drives that allow you to store huge amounts of data, but also read and write at the same time. So I think the whole range of optical storage technologies are the thing that are really going to offer a lot of promise for the future.
Great. Thanks for that, Michael. We now have a call coming in from Rich at Saratoga. Go ahead, please, Rich.
Yes.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, yeah, I am concerned about the high cost of computing. Right now, it's the use of a single computer is pretty much a one-on-one type of experience. I know my kid gets jealous because I spend so much time with it. My wife gets jealous because I spend so much time with it. I feel like I need to have 3 computers there. Given the high cost of computing these days, what kinds of efforts are underway to make the use of a single computer a multi-user experience?
Anyone want to take that?
Well, I think that the cost of computing is actually coming down. The entry cost is about the same. So you will always have computers that cost around $1,000, but the performance of those computers is going up tremendously. Someone once said that if the automobile industry had progressed as much in the last 20 years, or at the same rate as the computer industry, we'd be driving cars today that cost $100 and got 2,500 miles to the gallon. And I think that that there's a certain base level cost with the display and everything that you're not going to get much below commodity kind of costs for that, but that you'll have a tremendous amount of power. And with the network technology that's currently available, I think that, in fact, you'll have multi-user capability, fairly powerful capability pretty soon.
Well, we really have that today. I mean, AppleShare, which is this networking technology, software technology we developed, allows you to have, multiple use of one PC right now, one Macintosh right now.
Right.
And in Apple, it's routinely used in that way. I think many other places.
Yeah.
Yeah, but that's still using a number of computers at one time, and several people may be working on the same project using more than one computer. But are there any efforts to make the single unit computer a multi-user experience?
Well, again, the trend is in the opposite direction. In the 60s and 70s, the technology was basically time sharing, and there'd be multiple people trying to vie for the same computing resources. Alan Kay draws a good analogy that we're now in the information revolution. It's very similar to the Industrial Revolution, and that what enabled the Industrial Revolution was when they split the horsepower. So they in the old days used to have factories that had a single power source, and they distribute that power with belts and pulleys to the individual work sites. And what really made the Industrial Revolution take off was the fact that they split the horsepower and were able to put motors at each little job site. And similarly, in the information revolution, what happened was the advent of the personal computer, the microcomputer chip, allowed us to put the computing resource at the task. So I doubt seriously that people are going to start going in the opposite direction. There are a number of technical problems with time sharing, etc. But I think that the tendency is going to be towards multiple computers per individual rather than single computer for multiple individuals.
Thanks very much for that question, Rich. We now have got Michael back from Michigan. Michael, we got time constraints, so if you can just do one question, please. Go ahead, please, Michael.
Yes, we heard about the hardware side of voice I/O, but you didn't say much about the software side, the natural language processing involved, and this kind of fuzzy logic that we saw, and the serendipitous search. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that's a good question. There's this whole field that people refer to as artificial intelligence that has to do with really understanding what's meant by the speech and really what the user's trying to get at, how to carry on a conversation with a user that goes way beyond what we call recognition. That's part of why it's going to take 11 years. We've got people working on these things. The example we showed that is being done at MIT gives you some idea about how the system might actually carry on a conversation. It's got some simple AI programs in there, and those could be elaborated.
Thanks, Michael. We now have a question coming in from Lucy at Salem, Oregon. Lucy, your question, please.
Hello, this is Lucy McDonald.
Hi.
My question has to do with adult literacy. While we're waiting for the year 2001, is there some interim technology that can assist us in not necessarily voice recognition so much as digitized voice for the Macintosh use? Some of our problems are compression difficulties for memory constraints. And also I want to know if there's going to be any upgrade into something as old as Macintosh synthesized sound.
Right. Good set of questions. We're working on both of those things. We're aware of some of the limitations in Macintosh. I think that the compression stuff is well understood, and we have in fact, we have compression algorithms that you can get through our Developers Association right now, and we're working on even better ones. And we're also working on better ways of doing this speech synthesis, or going directly from text to speech. So we're making progress in both of those places.
Thanks for that question, Lucy. We now have a call coming in from Sandy at Long Beach. Sandy, go ahead.
Oh, yes. If you have time, I'd like for Mark to elaborate a little bit on the CD-ROM video. And I'd like to know if the $50,000 setups he alluded to are available only in research labs, or if there is someplace here in the Los Angeles area where one might see a demo.
Well, there are several companies out that provide these video teleconferencing systems, and those are the systems that I referred to, and they're commercially available. They're not just in research labs. So you can actually go out and purchase one, and the technology is not quite there. You can't use them over telephone lines, for example. You have to have special leased lines, and this is part of the cost. But there are a number of centers. Some of the phone companies, for example, provide them as a service. So you could, perhaps that would be a good place to start to see if they have any local ones that you could go and maybe call up some friend or colleague on the East Coast and actually try it out and see how it works. You know, you could probably rent some time on a system like that. So they are available. And I think that the cost, again, is going to be coming down in the next couple of years as it becomes more of commodity pricing when it gets into the consumer level video.
Thanks for that, Sandy. We now have a question from Scott in Maryland. Scott?
Hi. This question is going to be directed towards Mark, and it's interested in Spider, the availability, the cost, and the technology that it's based on.
Okay. The Advanced Technology Group at Apple is the research group, and we try to cover things that are going to take Apple into the future. And the center focus of some of our projects is really about 5 years out. So Spider was not designed to be a product from Apple, but more an effort for us to understand how that kind of capability would affect person on their day-to-day work experience. We think that kind of capability will be enabled once digital video compression technology gets reduced in cost. So look for about 3 to 5 year time frame before you'll see that, but I think you will see it in that kind of a time frame. You really wouldn't want to try and duplicate the Spider system. I mentioned before that it took about $500,000 worth of video equipment. You asked about what exactly what was involved there, and basically we had a 64 fully squared analog video router that would provide the video connectivity on demand, and we had to string special coax cables around to each of the cubes. So there's a lot of cost involved in that.
Thanks for that question, Scott. I should also add that one of the major purposes behind the Advanced Technology Group is to also tease us in marketing about what's coming on. They just dangle these interesting things in front of us and then just say beg, and we do. We now have a question coming in from Ira at Princeton. How you doing, Ira? Are you there, Ira?
Hi, Bert. Yep.
How are you?
Good.
Good.
Great show.
Thank you.
My question is for Mark, and it has to do with his estimate of 3 to 5 years before we will see interactive video. I know that recently several companies, at least 2 that I'm aware of, have announced chips that can do some of the compression algorithms that Mark alluded to. In fact, one of those companies was even started by an Apple alum. I'm wondering what else we're missing before we're going to see the kind of technology he talked about, if those chips are going to be available imminently.
Yeah, that's a good question, Ira. I'm aware of the companies that you're referring to, and basically the algorithm is a scalable algorithm. And one of the standards that's been proposed is a still compression algorithm. And this is basically what the chipset that they've announced will be able to do. And they're currently, I don't even know if they're actually sampling those chips right now, but it's going to be at least a full year before they have production quantities of those chips. And initially they'll have application in the still image kind of domain. There's still remaining chips to be built to round out the system, and those chips just are not fully designed yet. So I think just the time curves that are associated with silicon, I think 3 to 5 years is a pretty good estimate. It's interesting, though, for still image, today it takes about 14 minutes to send a still image over the telephone lines at, say, 9600 baud. And using this compression algorithm that's based on the DCT, you can send a version of that image in about 2.5 seconds over 9600 baud phone lines that is good enough to determine what that image is. So for things like browsing a database from your home over the phone lines, it makes a difference between something that's completely realistic, 2.5 seconds per image, and something that's totally unusable, 14 minutes per image. And you can get a compressed version of the image that's indistinguishable from the original after about, say, 1.5 minutes or 2 minutes over the phone lines versus the 14 minutes. It's a very promising technology. The still image stuff I think you'll see much sooner, perhaps in the next year or two. But the full motion video I think is going to take a little bit longer than that.
Well, I'm looking forward to being able to sit in front of this Mac 2 that I'm in front of now, and you'll be able to see me.
We're looking forward too, right. Let me just add one thing, that Mark said it's about a year until production quantities of even the still image chip, and It'll probably be another year for getting this full motion capability, perhaps another year, something on that order. But at some point, us computer makers have to actually build those into real systems. So that's where the 3 years comes from.
Right.
I'm a little more optimistic than Mark. I think 3. But
Well, hopefully our networks will grow in speed too, so we'll be able to catch up.
right.
That's right, Ira. Thanks very much for calling.
Thank you, Bert.
See you next month. Thanks very much, guys. I really appreciate you taking the time. I know this is a big investment of your time going through all the rehearsals, and I really appreciate it. We're just about out of satellite time, but it's not your last chance to tell us what you thought about the broadcast. So we set up an 800 number for you to call anytime today. Your answers are very important to us to help us plan future broadcasts. Please call the number you see on your screen, and you'll be prompted to ask a few questions, and your messages will be automatically recorded. Thanks for watching this first broadcast of the Apple Education TV series. As we close, we'd like to give you a preview of our next broadcast on May 16th, Multimedia 101, Getting Started. Thanks again, and also thanks to Rebecca Patton for putting this together. We'll see you on May 16th.
Some of the people who will join us at next month's teleconference, Multimedia 101. You'll get a chance to see and talk to some of the nation's leading innovators and creators of multimedia solutions on the Macintosh for higher education. Using sound, animations, video, and courseware can be a really magical thing. So join us next month and we'll not only show you the magic, but how to do the tricks. Multimedia 101, Getting Started, May 16th.